The hand connected with a sound that was both wet and sharp, a crack of flesh on flesh that stole the air from the sterile corridor. It was not a slap of theatrical anger. It was a strike of ownership, of correction, as one might strike a misbehaving animal. Ilara Vance felt the sting bloom across her cheek, a sudden blossoming heat that felt disconnected from the rest of her body. Her head snapped to the side, her dark hair pulled back in a severe but neat bun, barely shifting. She did not scream. She did not cry out. She did not even gasp. Her body, a vessel of long-practiced discipline and quiet exhaustion, simply absorbed the impact. Her training, the endless hours in emergency rooms where panic was a contagion to be smothered at birth, took over. She registered the data, the sudden acceleration of her own heart, the prickling of sweat at her temples, the way the fluorescent lights of the hospital's VIP wing seemed to buzz with a new and predatory energy. Her gaze, which had been fixed on the IV drip she was adjusting, slowly, deliberately, lifted. She looked at the woman who had struck her. Park Mina, fiancée of the hospital's most significant benefactor, a woman whose presence was announced by the cloying scent of expensive perfume and the click-clack of heels that sounded like tiny, angry hammers on the polished linoleum. Mina was beautiful in the way a sculpted ice swan is beautiful. Flawless, cold, and sharp enough to draw blood. Her face was a mask of furious indignation, her perfectly shaped lips twisted into a sneer. "When I tell you to change the saline, you do it immediately." Mina's voice was low, but it cut through the hospital quiet like a shard of glass. "You do not finish your little chart. You do not check your watch. You exist to follow my instructions. Do you understand me?" Behind Mina, her father, Mr. Park, shifted his weight. He was a man whose ambition had outpaced his spine, his expensive suit hanging on him like a costume he hadn't yet earned. He avoided Ilara's eyes, focusing instead on a point on the wall somewhere above her head, his expression a miserable cocktail of embarrassment and fear. He was a guest here in this world of true power. His daughter was supposed to be his passport, not his liability. Ilara's cheek throbbed, a deep, resonant ache. She could feel the imprint of Mina's fingers. She could feel the eyes of the other nurses at the station down the hall, their movements frozen, their faces pale. They were witnesses, but they were also employees. They were as trapped as she was. This was the quiet contract of working in the penthouse suite of medical care. The wealthy were not just patients, they were patrons, and their whims were to be weathered like bad storms. This was the final shift of a 70-hour week, a week spent dealing with life, death, and the crushing mundanity of paperwork. Ilara had come to this hospital in Seoul as a highly sought-after specialist, a cardiac nurse whose hands were as steady as a surgeon's, and whose diagnostic instincts were legendary. She was paid a small fortune to be the best, to be invisible, to be a seamless part of the machinery of wellness for those who could afford it. And for 3 years she had been. She had endured the petty cruelties, the casual condescension, the erasure of her expertise in favor of a patient's whim. She had taken it all and folded it away into that quiet, deep place inside her, where she kept all the hurts the world demanded she absorb in silence. But the slap was different. It was a line crossed. It was a violation that resonated beyond the professional into the purely personal. It was the kind of intimate violence that assumes absolute power over another's body. Ilara straightened her back. It was not a dramatic gesture, but it was a perceptible one. The slight slump of her shoulders, born of exhaustion, vanished. She became a column of quiet dignity, her white uniform suddenly seeming less like a servant's garb and more like armor. She met Mina's furious gaze and held it. In that moment, she made a decision. It was not a loud, fiery decision. It was a cold, clear one, like ice forming on a still lake. She was done. Done with this hospital, done with this city, done with swallowing indignity for a paycheck. The cost had become too high. With a calm that felt utterly alien to the fire on her skin, Ilara spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear, and the Korean was flawless, the diction perfect, the honorifics precise and sharp. Your father's heart rate is becoming unstable. Your raised voice is causing him distress. You should lower your tone and step away from the medical equipment. The words hung in the air, precise and unexpected. Mr. Park's eyes widened, flicking from Alara to his daughter. The nurses at the station exchanged shocked glances. It was one thing to speak Korean. Many of the foreign staff had a functional grasp of the language. It was another thing to speak it like this, with the nuanced cadence of a native, the kind of fluency that takes years of deep immersion to acquire. Mina's face, which had been a mask of rage, flickered. For a split second, confusion warred with her anger. Then it happened. A sound more insulting than the slap. Mina laughed. It was not a sound of humor. It was a braying, ugly noise of pure derision. She threw her head back, a caricature of mirth. "Oh, listen to that!" she sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "The little nurse has learned a few phrases. How cute! Did you practice that in front of a mirror? Does it make you feel important?" She leaned in closer, her perfume a suffocating cloud. "Let me be clear in a language you can truly understand," she hissed, switching to clipped, cruel English. "You are nothing. You are a tool, a piece of equipment, and when I am finished with you, you will be a broken one." She had no idea. She had absolutely no idea who had trained her. Mina was working from a version of Alara that had never been accurate. She saw a black woman, a foreigner, a servant. She saw a uniform and a name tag. She did not see the 2 years spent in a quiet, traditional house in the Korean countryside. She did not see the old woman with eyes as bright as a magpie's, the matriarch of a dynasty who had taken a quiet, competent American nurse into her confidence. She did not see the long afternoons spent reading poetry aloud, the painstaking lessons in calligraphy, the shared meals where every dish came with a story. She did not see the matriarch's grandson, a silent, watchful presence in the background, a young man who had insisted with quiet authority that Ilara learn his language, not for his sake, but for his grandmother's, so they could share their stories without a filter, so that Ilara could understand the nuances of the old woman's pain and her joy. Mina saw a nurse. She did not see the woman who had held the hand of Lee Jinwoo's grandmother as she passed from this world. She did not see the woman to whom the old woman had whispered her final secrets. She had no idea. "Take your hand off her." The voice was not loud. It was a low, quiet rumble, like distant thunder. It did not cut through the tension in the hallway. It simply erased it, replacing it with something else. A new kind of silence. The kind of silence that doesn't echo. The kind that settles, heavy and absolute. Every head turned. He stood at the end of the corridor, having emerged from the double doors of the premier suite, the one reserved for the man who owned the ground the hospital was built on. He did not rush. He was not performing. He simply stood there, a figure of impossible stillness in a world of frantic motion. Lee Jin-woo. He was dressed in a charcoal suit so exquisitely tailored it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin. His white shirt was stark against the tanned column of his throat. Not a single hair was out of place. His face was a study in impassive geometry, all sharp angles and quiet planes. But it was his eyes that held the room captive. They were dark, observant, and at this moment they were fixed on the point where Mina's perfectly manicured hand was still gripping the front of Alara's uniform, twisting the fabric. The atmosphere in the corridor underwent a chemical change. The buzzing of the lights seemed to fade. The distant beep of a monitor sounded jarringly loud. Mr. Park looked as if he had seen a ghost, his face draining of all color, leaving behind a waxy, sickly pallor. Mina froze, her hand clamped onto Alara's uniform like a vice. Her sneer faltered, melting into a bewildered frown. "Jin-woo," she began, her voice suddenly breathy, uncertain. This nurse was being insubordinate." He took a single step forward, and then another. His movements were unhurried, measured, each footfall on the polished floor making almost no sound. It was the walk of a predator that knows its prey is already cornered. He wasn't walking toward Mina. He was walking toward Alara. His eyes never left hers. In them, she saw no surprise, no shock, only a quiet, unnerving recognition. It was as if he had been standing there all along, watching, waiting. He stopped directly in front of them, so close that Alara could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He smelled of clean linen, expensive wool, and something else, something cold and metallic, like the air after a lightning strike. He did not look at Mina. He did not acknowledge her existence. His gaze remained on Alara's face, on the red mark blooming on her cheek. His own expression did not change, but something in the depths of his eyes hardened, like liquid metal cooling into steel. He lifted his hand, slowly. For a terrifying second, Alara thought he might touch her face, and she braced herself for a contact she wasn't ready for. But his fingers, long and elegant, went to Mina's hand, the one still clutching her uniform. He did not grab it. He did not strike it away. He simply closed his hand around her wrist. Mina gasped, a small, choked sound. "I said," Jinwoo repeated, his voice even lower now, a silken murmur that was more terrifying than any shout. "Take your hand off her." He applied no visible pressure, yet Mina's fingers flew open as if she had touched a live wire. Her hand fell away, and she stumbled back a step, cradling her wrist, her face a mask of shock and pain. "Jinwoo, Security," Jinwoo said, his voice still quiet. He was still looking at Alara, only at Alara. From the stairwell door, 2 men appeared. They were built like refrigerators and moved with the silent, fluid efficiency of men who are paid to solve problems before they have names. They wore the same dark suits as Jinwoo, the unofficial uniform of his personal detail. They flanked Mina and her father, their presence a sudden, suffocating wall. "Mr. Lee?" one of them asked, his voice a gravelly baritone. "Mr. Park is feeling unwell," Jinwoo said, his tone conversational as if discussing the weather. "His daughter is overwrought. Escort them to their car. Ensure they leave the premises immediately." He paused, his eyes finally flicking to Mina, and for the first time a flicker of emotion crossed his face. It was not anger. It was a cold, profound disappointment. "Our engagement is terminated. My legal team will be in contact with your fathers to discuss the dissolution of our family's business arrangements. Do not contact me again." It was a corporate execution delivered in a single, calm breath. Mina's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. The arrogance, the fire, the sheer, self-assured cruelty, it all evaporated, leaving behind a gaping, terrified child. Her performance had ended, and she had no script for this new reality. "But the wedding, the arrangements," Mr. Park stammered, his voice thin and reedy. He was watching his future, his status, his financial salvation, walk out the door. Jinwoo did not answer him. He had already dismissed them from his reality. The security men each placed a firm hand on an elbow, one on Mina's, one on her father's, and began to guide them down the hallway. There was no struggle. The fight had gone out of them. They were simply components being removed from a machine that had already moved on. Mina began to sob, a raw, ugly sound that echoed in the now empty corridor. The double doors swung shut behind them, and the silence returned. But it was a different silence now. It was Alara's silence. Jinwoo turned his full attention back to her. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were searching hers, taking in the red mark on her cheek, the slight tremor in her hands that she could not control, the exhaustion that went bone deep. "Are you injured?" he asked. His English was as perfect as her Korean. Ilara found her voice. It was hoarse. "It's just a slap." "There is no such thing as just a slap," he corrected her gently. He took a step back, creating a small pocket of space between them. It was a gesture of respect, giving her room to breathe. "I have a car waiting downstairs. My head of security will handle the necessary paperwork with the hospital administration. You are finished here for the day." It was not a request. It was a statement of fact. He was not asking her permission. He was informing her of a decision that had already been made. Part of her, the fiercely independent part that had carried her through her entire life, bristled at being handled. But another, much larger part of her, the part that was so tired she could feel it in her marrow, was flooded with a disorienting sense of relief. "I have to finish my shift," she said, the words automatic, a reflex of her professionalism. "I have patience." "Nurse Han is taking over your duties," Jinwoo said calmly. "I spoke with the floor supervisor while you were being occupied." He had been there. He had been watching. He had been arranging things in the background while Mina was performing her petty theater of cruelty. The thought was both terrifying and strangely comforting. "Come," he said, gesturing with one hand toward the private elevator at the end of the hall. "We have things to discuss." Alara looked down at her hands, then at the pristine white of her uniform, now wrinkled where Mina had grabbed it. She looked at the IV pole, the chart left unfinished. For a moment, she was paralyzed by the sheer gravitational pull of her responsibilities. But then she looked at Lee Jinwoo, at the quiet certainty in his eyes, and she felt that cold, clear decision she had made just moments before solidify into something unbreakable. She was done. Without another word, she unclipped her name badge from her pocket and placed it carefully on the counter of the nurse's station. The small piece of plastic made a soft clicking sound in the quiet hall. It was the sound of a door closing. Then she turned and walked toward him, leaving her old life behind her on the counter. The back of the Maybach was less a car and more a private room that happened to be moving. The leather seats were the color of cream, and the air was cool and silent, insulated from the chaotic symphony of Seoul's traffic. Alara sat stiffly, her hands folded in her lap, watching the rain begin to streak the tinted windows. She felt utterly disconnected, a ghost observing a life that was no longer her own. Jinwoo sat across from her, not beside her, another gesture of respect for her space. He had not spoken since they entered the elevator. He was simply watching her, his expression still and unreadable. He was not looking at her with pity or anger or even concern. He was looking at her with an unnerving intensity, as if he were trying to solve a complex equation. Finally, he spoke, his voice the same low, steady tone he'd used in the hospital. "You should have called me." The statement hung in the silent car. It was not an accusation, but it felt like one. Alara's spine stiffened. "I am not in the habit of calling powerful men to solve my problems." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, so faint it was barely there. "I am aware. My grandmother called you her American turtle. Hard on the outside, soft on the inside, and you carry your home on your back." The memory hit her with the force of a physical blow. His grandmother, Mrs. Lee, a tiny woman with a will of iron and a laugh like wind chimes. The 2 years Alara had spent as her private nurse had been a strange, quiet interlude in her life. She had been hired for her medical skills, but she had quickly become a companion, a confidant. And Jinwoo, he had been a shadow in the background, the dutiful grandson who visited every weekend, bringing with him an aura of immense, quiet power that made the household staff nervous. He would sit in the garden while Alara and his grandmother talked, never speaking, just listening. "She said that?" Alara's voice was soft. "Frequently," Jinwoo confirmed. "She was very fond of you." He paused, his dark eyes holding hers. "When she passed, you disappeared. My attempts to contact you were unsuccessful." Alara looked away, out the window at the blurred city lights. "I don't leave because things become complicated. I leave because they are over. My job was done." "Her job was done," he corrected gently. "Your relationship with our family was not. She left you something. In her will." This was news to her. Alara had left Korea within a week of the funeral, wanting no part of the formal grieving of a family she was not truly part of. "I don't want anything." "I know," he said. "That is why she left it to you. It is a small apartment in Insadong, and a portfolio of stocks she managed herself. She was a better investor than anyone in my company. It is now substantial. He said the word substantial with the same emotional weight as if he were saying adequate. Alara felt a wave of dizziness. She had been living paycheck to paycheck, sending most of her salary home to support her mother and younger sister. The idea of owning property, of having a portfolio, was so alien it felt like a fiction. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked, her voice tight with suspicion. "Because for the last year, you have been working in a hospital that my family owns, living in an apartment building that my family owns, and enduring harassment from a woman I was unfortunately engaged to. At every turn, you have been within my sphere of influence, yet you have never once reached out. You have suffered in silence when you had every resource at your disposal. I am telling you this now because I have just witnessed the culmination of your silence, and I will not allow it to continue." His calmness was infuriating. It was the calm of a man who arranges the world to his liking and is annoyed when a piece falls out of place. "You don't get to allow or disallow anything in my life, Mr. Lee," she said, her voice sharp. "I appreciate your intervention at the hospital. I do not appreciate the implication that I am now your responsibility. My grandmother made you my responsibility," he stated, a simple declaration of fact. Her final words to me were not about her legacy or the company or our family's honor. They were, and I quote, "Look after the turtle. She doesn't know how to ask for help." The air went out of Alara's lungs. She could hear Mrs. Lee's voice in her head, that raspy, affectionate whisper. She had been holding the old woman's hand, monitoring her fading pulse, when Jinwoo had entered the room. She had bowed and made to leave, to give them privacy, but Mrs. Lee's grip had tightened on her hand, keeping her there. She had listened as the matriarch gave her grandson her final instructions in a torrent of Korean Alara had only partially understood at the time. "That is why you had me learn Korean," she whispered, the realization dawning on her. It hadn't been just for conversation. It had been for this, so she could understand. "My grandmother believed that language was the key to understanding a person's soul," Jinwoo said. "She wanted you to understand hers, and she wanted me to understand yours. She was a very deliberate woman." "She was a meddler," Ilara said, but there was no heat in it, only a profound, aching affection. "She was a queen," he corrected, "and her dying wishes are my law." He leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on his knees. "Mina Park and her family will no longer be a concern. Professionally, your record at the hospital will be amended to reflect a voluntary resignation with a bonus for exemplary service. Any negative reports filed by the Park family will be expunged. I have already spoken to your former supervisor. She understands the situation perfectly." Alara imagined the floor supervisor, a stern, unyielding woman, receiving a call from Lee Jinwoo. She imagined the woman's immediate, total capitulation. The power he wielded was not loud, but it was absolute. It was structural. He didn't just have influence, he owned the structures themselves. "And what do you want from me in return?" she asked, the question old and weary. Men like him always wanted something. Jinwoo settled back into his seat. The car turned smoothly, the motion barely perceptible. "For now, I want you to see a doctor, a different one, at a private clinic, to have your face examined. I want you to get a full night's sleep in a place where you are safe, and tomorrow I want you to meet my lawyers so they can transfer your inheritance into your name." He paused. "After that, I want you to decide what you want to do next. Whatever that is, I will make it happen." It was too much. It was too easy. Her life had been a series of struggles, of pushing against immovable objects. To have someone simply offer to clear the path was disorienting, like trying to walk in zero gravity. "Why?" she asked, the single word encompassing a universe of questions. "Why do all this? Why for me?" Jinwoo looked out the window at the rain-slicked streets of Gangnam. For the first time, she saw a flicker of something vulnerable in his profile. "Because for 2 years, you gave my grandmother a quality of life that no doctor or medicine could provide. You gave her companionship. You gave her dignity. You were the only person in her life who wanted nothing from her. You saw her not as a matriarch or a figurehead, but as a person. He turned his gaze back to her, and his eyes were dark with an ancient, unassailable loyalty. That is a debt my family can never truly repay, but we will spend the rest of our lives trying. The car slowed to a halt, pulling into a private underground garage. A man in a dark suit was waiting, an umbrella in his hand. You are safe now, Ilarasi, Jinwoo said, using the formal honorific with a softness that felt intensely personal. Rest. Tomorrow we will begin. The apartment was less a home and more a statement. It occupied the entire top floor of a skyscraper in Samseong-dong, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a god's-eye view of the sprawling city. The furniture was minimalist and brutally expensive, all clean lines and neutral colors. It felt like a gallery, a place for observing, not for living. There were no books on the shelves, no photos on the walls, no clutter of life. It was his apartment, she realized. He had brought her to his home. A quiet, middle-aged woman, his housekeeper, showed her to a guest suite that was larger than her entire previous apartment. A doctor, a woman with kind eyes and efficient hands, arrived within the hour. She examined Alara's cheek, pronounced it a deep bruise but nothing more, and prescribed a mild anti-inflammatory cream. She left without presenting a bill. Everything was handled. Ilara stood under the spray of a rainfall shower for a long time, letting the hot water wash away the sterile scent of the hospital, the cloying perfume of Mina Park, the lingering grime of her exhaustion. She changed into the soft silk pajamas that had been laid out for her and walked into the cavernous living room. Jinwoo was standing by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking out at the glittering expanse of Seoul. He had removed his suit jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his white shirt, revealing strong forearms traced with faint, pale scars. He looked less like a corporate sovereign now and more like a soldier at rest. He heard her enter and turned. The housekeeper has prepared a late dinner if you are hungry. I'm not, she said, walking to stand a respectful distance away from him, her arms wrapped around herself. The silence stretched between them, comfortable this time, not tense. This is temporary, she said finally, needing to establish the boundary. A place to stay until I get my affairs in order. Of course, he agreed easily. Too easily. I will find my own apartment, the one your grandmother left me. My lawyers will facilitate that, he said, taking a small sip of his whiskey. The property has had a tenant for the last year, a university student. Evicting him will take 30 days by law. Of course it would. He had thought of everything. He had built her a cage of perfect, considerate logic. She would be here, under his roof, under his watch, for at least a month. She felt a familiar surge of defiant independence, but it was quickly swamped by a wave of profound weariness. For the first time in a very long time, she did not have the energy to fight. Fine, she said, her voice barely a whisper. 30 days. He gave a slight nod, accepting her surrender with quiet grace. Good. Now, tell me about your family. The question was so unexpected it threw her off balance. What about them? My grandmother mentioned a mother and a younger sister in America. Your sister is in university, studying art history. Your mother has recurring medical issues. The majority of your salary has been going to them. It was not a question. He had done his research. He was not a man who operated on incomplete data. You have no right to look into my family, she said, her voice cold. When the safety of someone under my protection is concerned, I have every right, he countered, his tone unyielding. Your financial obligations make you vulnerable. They are the reason you tolerated an intolerable situation at that hospital for so long. As of this morning, that vulnerability has been eliminated. I have established a trust, funded by the dividends of your inherited portfolio. It will provide for your mother's medical care and your sister's tuition indefinitely. The first payment was wired to your mother's account 5 hours ago. Ilara stared at him, speechless. He had reached across the world and rearranged her life, her responsibilities, her very identity as a provider, all without her knowledge or consent. It was the most arrogant, high-handed, and profoundly kind thing anyone had ever done for her. "You can't do that," she whispered, her mind reeling. "I can," he said simply, "and I have. You are now financially independent. Your choices from this moment forward need only be for yourself." She thought about her mother, the constant worry in her voice during their weekly calls. She thought about her sister, who worked 2 jobs to supplement the money Alara sent for her art supplies. The weight of their well-being had been a constant pressure on her chest for a decade, a dull ache that never subsided. And with a few quiet keystrokes, he had lifted it. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, hot and unwelcome. She turned away, mortified. She did not cry. She was the American turtle. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling small and inadequate. He did not reply. He simply stood there, giving her the space to process the tectonic shift in her world. After a long moment, he spoke again, his voice softer. "My grandmother would have liked your sister. She believed art was the only truth worth telling." The days that followed fell into a strange, quiet rhythm. Alara slept more than she had in years, deep, dreamless sleeps in the silent, comfortable guest room. She spent her mornings with Jinwoo's lawyers, a team of ruthlessly efficient men and women who explained the complexities of her inheritance with terrifying clarity. She was, as Jinwoo had said, a wealthy woman. The thought was so absurd she had to suppress a hysterical laugh during a meeting about tax liability. Jinwoo was a constant but unobtrusive presence. He worked from a home office that was more like a command center, its walls lined with monitors displaying stock tickers, shipping routes, and encrypted news feeds. They ate their meals together, often in silence, at a large mahogany table. It was not an awkward silence. It was a companionable one, the quiet of 2 people who were comfortable in their own thoughts. He never asked her about the hospital. He never mentioned Mina Park. He asked her about her work, about cardiac procedures, about the flaws in modern medical bureaucracy. He listened with an intense focus, his questions sharp and insightful. He was learning her, she realized, not as a woman or a victim or a project, but as a professional. He was assessing her competence, her intelligence, and she, in turn, was learning him. She saw the ruthlessness. A phone call, conducted in low, rapid-fire Korean, resulted in the hostile takeover of a rival shipping company. He delivered the final commands with the dispassionate air of a man ordering lunch. She saw the loyalty. His head of security, a man named Kang, came to him one evening with a personal problem. His son had been arrested on a minor charge. Jinwoo made another call, and the problem was solved within the hour. He ruled his world with a quiet, unshakable authority, and his empire was built on 2 pillars: absolute competence and absolute loyalty. One evening, he came home late, a dark line of exhaustion etched around his mouth. He had a deep gash on his left forearm, crudely bandaged. A negotiation became animated, was all he said, shrugging off his jacket. Alara's training took over instantly. "Sit down," she ordered, her voice crisp with the authority she used in the ER. For the first time, he looked surprised, but he obeyed, sitting on the edge of a low sofa while she retrieved the medical kit she had insisted the housekeeper purchase. Her hands were steady as she unwrapped the clumsy bandage, cleaned the wound, and applied 3 perfect butterfly stitches to close the skin. His arm was tense under her fingers, the muscle hard as stone. He did not flinch. He just watched her face, his expression unreadable. "You should have gone to a hospital," she admonished him, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. "I have a better nurse here," he said, his voice a low murmur. Their eyes met over his arm. The air in the room thickened, charged with a sudden unspoken energy. She was touching him, a casual, professional intimacy that felt more profound than any embrace. She could feel the heat of his skin, the steady, slow beat of his pulse beneath her fingertips. He was real. Not a concept of power, but a man of flesh and blood and scars. She finished her work, her movements precise and economical. "It will leave a scar," she said, her voice returning to its professional coolness. I have others, he said softly. This one will be my favorite. She pulled back, breaking the contact, flustered by the raw intimacy of the moment. She was a nurse. He was a patient. But that was not what this was. This was something else entirely, something she was not equipped to handle. I'm going to bed, she announced abruptly, turning before he could see the flush on her cheeks. She heard him chuckle, a low, warm sound. Good night, Alara C. Meanwhile, in a much less opulent part of the city, Mina Park was discovering the true nature of structural power. Her world was not collapsing. It had already collapsed. It had been a hollow structure propped up by Jinwoo's influence, and he had simply kicked out the supports. The credit cards were declined. The invitations to exclusive events stopped arriving. Friends who had once fawned over her now crossed the street to avoid her. Her father, a man who had built a moderately successful electronics company, was in a state of freefall. His primary distribution contract, which had been with a subsidiary of Jinwoo's corporation, was terminated due to a newly discovered breach of ethics clause. His lines of credit, held by a bank in which Jinwoo was the majority shareholder, were recalled. He was ruined. Mina did not understand. In her world, power was a performance. It was about being seen, about being loud, about demonstrating dominance, a slap, a sneer, a public humiliation. These were the tools of power she understood. She could not comprehend this silent, invisible demolition. She had not been defeated in a fight. She had simply been erased from the board. He'll take me back, she insisted to her weeping mother, pacing the floor of their rapidly downsizing apartment. This is just a test. He's punishing me. He wants me to beg. Her father, a broken man hunched over a stack of overdue bills, just shook his head. You don't understand him, Mina. He is not a man who tests. He is a man who decides. But Mina was a creature of pure, undiluted arrogance. She could not accept that she had been discarded. She believed with every fiber of her being that Jinwoo's obsession with the nurse was a temporary madness, a fleeting infatuation. She was Park Mina. He was Lee Jinwoo. Their union was a matter of class, of destiny. The nurse was an anomaly, a glitch in the system. She began to plan. She would not beg. She would remind him of who she was. She would force a confrontation. The annual Obsidian Gala, the most exclusive charity event in Asia, hosted by Jinwoo's own foundation, was in 2 weeks. It was the pinnacle of their social world. She was, of course, no longer on the guest list, but she still had the dress she had commissioned for it, a creation of silk and diamonds that had cost more than a luxury car. She would go to the gala. She would find him. She would confront him in front of everyone. She would shame him into taking her back, expose the nurse as a manipulative interloper. In her mind, the scene was dramatic, cinematic. She would be magnificent in her righteous fury. He would see her, resplendent and defiant, and remember his obligation, his duty, his world. She was a fool, playing checkers against a grandmaster of chess who had already won the game 10 moves ago. She was not planning an attack. She was walking, with perfect, tragic confidence, directly into the heart of his trap. He had not updated the file on her. He was working from a version of himself that had never been accurate. He thought she was merely a problem to be managed. He had no idea she was the architect of his own public execution. The night of the Obsidian Gala arrived on a wave of cool, crisp autumn air. The venue was a modern art museum that Jinwoo's company had built and donated to the city, a soaring structure of glass and black steel that cantilevered over the Han River. The elite of Asia were in attendance: tech billionaires, government ministers, old-money chaebol families, and the silent, watchful figures who operated in the shadows of power. Alara stood on a private balcony overlooking the main hall, a glass of champagne untouched in her hand. She wore a simple, architecturally precise gown of deep emerald silk. Jinwoo had not asked her to come. He had stated it as a fact. "You will be my guest at the gala tonight. It is time you were introduced." She had resisted, but her protests had been weak. A part of her was curious to see him in his natural habitat, to witness the full public display of his power. He stood beside her now, a commanding presence in a flawless black tuxedo. He looked like a king surveying his domain. "Are you nervous?" he asked, his voice low. "I've faced down a ruptured aortic aneurysm in a moving ambulance," she replied, her own voice dry. "A room full of rich people is not intimidating." He smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. It transformed his face, softening the hard angles and revealing a glimpse of the man his grandmother had adored. "Good, because many of them are about to become your patients." "I'm not a nurse anymore," she reminded him. "You are. You just don't have an employer," he corrected. "2 weeks ago, I finalized the acquisition of a controlling stake in the Seoul International Medical Center, the same hospital where you worked. The board meeting is next week. My first motion will be to create a new department, patient advocacy and protocol reform. My second motion will be to appoint you as its director with an autonomous budget and final authority on all procedural matters." Alara stared at him, her mind struggling to process the information. He hadn't just cleared her name. He hadn't just given her a job. He had bought her the entire hospital and was handing her the keys. "Jinwoo," she began, but the words caught in her throat. The sheer scale of his actions was breathtaking. "You saw the flaws in the system," he said simply. "I am giving you the power to fix them. You are the most capable person I have ever met, Alara. It is time the world was made aware of that fact." Before she could respond, a disturbance rippled through the crowd below. Conversations faltered, heads turned. A path was clearing near the grand entrance, not out of respect, but out of a desire to create distance. Mina Park had arrived. She was a vision of desperate, defiant glamour. Her diamond-encrusted dress glittered under the chandeliers, a beacon of misplaced opulence. Her hair and makeup were flawless, but her eyes held a feverish, frantic light. She scanned the crowd, her gaze sweeping past the faces of her former friends, searching, hunting. Security moved to intercept her, but she sidestepped them with a shrill, "Don't you dare touch me!" Her voice, amplified by the hall's acoustics, was jarringly loud. Her eyes found them, standing on the balcony, separate and above. A triumphant, vindictive smile spread across her face. This was it, her moment. "Jinwoo!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling, diamond-ringed finger up at them. "There you are, hiding in the shadows with your little whore." A collective gasp went through the hall. The silence that followed was absolute, a shocked vacuum. This was not the kind of drama that happened at the Obsidian Gala. This was messy, ugly, public. Alara felt a cold knot of dread in her stomach. She wanted to retreat, to disappear, but Jinwoo placed a steadying hand on the small of her back. His touch was warm, firm, and utterly calm. "Stay here," he murmured, his voice a quiet command. Then he turned and walked to the top of the grand staircase, descending the steps slowly, deliberately, into the center of the silent storm. He did not look angry. He looked bored, as if this were a tedious but necessary piece of administrative work. "Mina," he said, his voice calm and carrying easily through the silent hall. "You are not welcome here. You should leave." "I'm not going anywhere," she spat, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and adrenaline. "Not until you come to your senses. You have an obligation to me, to my family. You can't just throw us away for her." She gestured wildly up at Alara. "A nobody, a foreign nurse who you think you can save. She's playing you, you fool. She's a parasite." Jinwoo stopped at the bottom of the staircase, a few feet from her. He listened patiently, his hands clasped behind his back, as if hearing out a business proposal he had no intention of accepting. When she finally paused for breath, he spoke. "You seem to be operating under a number of grave misapprehensions," he said, his tone still mild, almost professorial. "Let me correct them for you." He took a small step closer. "First, I have no obligation to you. Our engagement was a business contract which you violated the moment you assaulted a member of my protected staff. The penalty clauses were quite clear and severe. Mina's face paled slightly. Protected staff? Second, he continued, ignoring her question, you speak of your family. Let's be clear about your family's status. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his movements economical. He tapped the screen. Your father's company, Park Electronics, was acquired yesterday in a leveraged buyout by a holding company based in the Cayman Islands. As of 9 a.m. this morning, I am the sole owner of that holding company. Your father is no longer CEO. He is an unemployed man with considerable personal debt. Mina's jaw dropped. A low murmur went through the crowd. This was better than theater. Third, Jin Woo went on, his voice relentless, you mention your home. The mortgage on your family's apartment in Apgujeong was held by Shinhan Bank. As you know, I am a primary shareholder. The bank chose to sell that debt last week to a private equity firm. I also own that firm. The eviction notice was served to your parents this afternoon. They have 30 days. Mina swayed on her feet, her hand flying to her throat. The diamonds on her dress seemed to mock her, glittering symbols of a wealth that no longer existed. Fourth, Jin Woo said, taking another step. He was now towering over her. You call Miss Vance a nobody. Let me introduce her properly. He turned his head and looked up at the balcony, his eyes finding Alara's. His expression softened. That woman is Alara Vance. For 2 years, she was the private nurse and trusted companion to my grandmother, the late Lee Soo-jin, matriarch of our family. She is the person my grandmother entrusted with her final thoughts and wishes. She is also, as of next week, the new director of patient advocacy and protocol reform for the entire Seoul International Medical Center network, a position from which she will oversee the health and dignity of thousands of patients. She is, in short, one of the most important and capable people in this room. He turned his devastatingly calm gaze back to Mina. And fifth, you accuse her of being a parasite. The truth is, Mina, you were the parasite. You and your family attached yourselves to my name, to my resources, believing it was your right. You produced nothing. You contributed nothing. You only consumed. And you were cruel in your consumption. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the suffocating silence of the hall. The difference between Miss Vance and you, he concluded, his voice dropping to a near whisper, is that she has earned everything she has. Her skill, her dignity, her place by my side. You, on the other hand, have earned this. He gestured to the security team who had been waiting patiently. Remove her. It was then that Mina finally broke. The carefully constructed facade of defiance and rage shattered, revealing the terrified, hollow creature beneath. A raw, animal wail of despair tore from her throat. No, she sobbed, dropping to her knees. The sound of silk tearing was audible as the expensive dress gave way. No, please, Jinwoo, please, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. She crawled toward him, her hands outstretched, her perfect makeup now a mess of tears and mascara. Don't do this, please. I'll do anything. He looked down at her, his face a mask of cold, pitiless stone. He did not look at her as a jilted lover, or even a disappointed acquaintance. He looked at her as one might look at a bug on the floor, something unpleasant to be cleaned up. He did not rush. He was not performing. The security men took her arms and lifted her to her feet. She struggled, her sobs turning into incoherent shrieks. They dragged her, kicking and wailing, toward the exit, her diamond dress scraping along the polished marble floor. The great glass doors opened and then closed behind her, swallowing her screams. The ruin was absolute, financial, social, personal, and it had been executed publicly, in front of the very people whose opinions she valued above all else. Jinwoo stood for a moment in the center of the room, a lone, dark figure in a sea of shocked faces. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back up the grand staircase. He did not look at the crowd. He did not acknowledge their whispers, their stunned expressions. His eyes were fixed only on Alara. He reached the balcony and came to stand before her. He held out his hand. She looked at his outstretched hand, then up at his face. The coldness was gone, replaced by a quiet, searching tenderness. In his eyes, she saw the silent boy in the garden, the grieving grandson, the ruthless CEO, and the man who had ordered her stitches with a soft command. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. It was not a gesture of ownership. It was a gesture of partnership. He led her to the edge of the balcony to stand before the silent, watchful crowd. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice calm and clear. "My apologies for the interruption. Please, enjoy your evening." He then looked down at Ilara, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "I would like to introduce you to Ilara Vance, my future." The words were simple, declarative, final. A slow exhale escaped Ilara's lips, a breath she felt she had been holding for years. The weight on her chest, the constant grinding pressure of endurance, finally lifted. A real smile touched her lips, reaching her eyes for the first time in a long, long time. It was a smile of relief, of vindication, of a profound and settled peace. She was not a turtle hiding in her shell. She was not a project to be saved. She was not a responsibility to be managed. She was home. Later that night, they stood again by the vast window in his apartment, looking out at the city lights. The emerald gown was gone, replaced by the simple comfort of silk pajamas. The tuxedo was gone, replaced by a soft t-shirt and dark pants. The silence between them was deep and comfortable, filled with the unspoken events of the evening. "Was that necessary?" she asked quietly. "The public nature of it all." "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Power like mine attracts two kinds of people, those who want to build with it and those who want to feed on it. The parasites must be dealt with in a way that discourages future infestations." It was not for her. It was a message for everyone else. He turned to face her. "And it was for you, so that you would never again doubt your position, so that no one would ever again make the mistake of underestimating you." "No one will," she agreed, a hint of dry wit in her tone. "You bought me a hospital, Jinwoo. I think the message was received." He chuckled, the sound warm and intimate in the quiet room. "The hospital is a tool. I gave it to you because you are the best person to wield it. What you build with it is your own." She thought of the changes she could make, the protocols she could rewrite, the nurses she could empower, the patients she could protect from the indignities she herself had suffered. A sense of purpose, clean and sharp, settled over her. For the first time, her future was not a hazy horizon of endurance, but a clear and open road. "My mother called," she said, changing the subject. She was confused and crying. Apparently, her doctor's office called to tell her all her future treatments were covered in full. "Good," he said. "The trust is operating as designed." "My sister called too," Ilara continued, a small smile playing on her lips. "She wanted to know if I had been adopted by a secret royal family. She said the university bursar's office informed her she had a full scholarship, including a stipend for materials. She's planning to study abroad in Florence next year." "Italy has a fine appreciation for the arts," Jinwoo noted, his expression neutral, but she could see the satisfaction in his eyes. You are a steamroller," she said, not with accusation, but with a kind of awe. "You just flatten every obstacle in your path." "I am a businessman," he corrected. "I identify inefficiencies and I remove them. Your family's financial precarity was an inefficiency. Your professional suppression was an inefficiency. Mina Park was a gross inefficiency." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "The only thing I have not yet been able to solve is the 30 days until your apartment is ready." "And what happens after 30 days?" she asked, her heart beating a little faster. "After 30 days, you will have the keys to your own home, a directorship of a major medical center, and complete financial independence," he said, his voice a low, serious murmur. "You will be free to do whatever you want, to stay in Seoul, to return to America, to build your new life on your own terms, without any obligation to me." He was giving her an out. After everything, after rearranging the universe for her, He was making it clear that the door was still open, that this was her choice. She looked at him, at this impossible man who spoke of loyalty like a religion and wielded power like a scalpel. She thought of the quiet meals, the shared silence, the feeling of his pulse under her fingertips. She thought of the profound, earth-shattering relief of being truly seen, of being valued not for her endurance, but for her competence. She had spent her entire life carrying her home on her back, a turtle, moving from one place to the next, always self-contained, always alone. But safety wasn't a place you carried with you. Safety was a person. It was the quiet certainty that someone saw you, understood you, and would stand between you and the storm. "I don't leave because things become complicated, Jinwoo," she said softly, echoing her own words from the car. "I leave because they are over." She took a small step closer, into his space, into the warmth of his orbit. "This," she whispered, looking up into his dark, watchful eyes, "doesn't feel like it's over." A slow smile spread across his face, the real one, the one that reached his eyes and made him look like a man who had just won a victory more important than any company or contract. "No," he agreed, his voice husky. He lifted a hand, and this time he did touch her face. His fingers were gentle as they traced the faint, fading shadow of the bruise on her cheek. "It feels like it's just beginning." And in the quiet of the penthouse high above the sleeping city, the American turtle finally set her burden down. She had found a new kind of silence. Not the silence of endurance, but the silence of peace, the kind that settles, the kind that lasts. It was the beginning of a life built not on a fairy tale, but on the solid, unshakable foundation of a debt repaid, a competence recognized, and a quiet, extraordinary love. The kind of love that didn't shout, the kind that simply and finally was.